Okay, ready to haul.
I got
nice
rock
easy.
edge, you know. Slow.
So pretty cool place here in Milton. Lots of cliffs. A lot of high angle rescue teams come here and train. It's got a lot of great rock walls and formations and stuff to train on. We come here quite often and just practice with new gear and new techniques, and yeah, so we're gonna show you some of those today. Enjoy.
Soft interface, let's get off the tape.
Yeah, that's good.
Couple slings.
Send someone over, you bring your belay line up high so it facilitates easy edge transition and over. As soon as they make past the edge transition, you start to drop that belay line down a little bit lower, which will now maximize your amount of safety. The concern being, if the tripod were to fail or fall over, then your belay line is closer to the ground and it has a lot less distance to fall. In a catastrophic failure of a tripod or a main line snapping for whatever reason, you want to minimize the amount of drop that goes into your belay line, right? So you don't have any problems that way. Tripod's considered to be a bomb-proof anchor. The problem is not really with the tripod, it's more with your area that you put the tripod. You know, that rock that we have it on right now, if that rock falls over, the whole thing falls, and the whole tripod falls over, then we want
That'd be super epic.
It'd be super epic. Yeah. Super cool, hopefully on video.
It's like chiseling away over.
And that you've somehow dodged that rock falling down on you.
Exactly.
Well, does anyone else actually want to go now?
Yeah, you're done.
I think like going to the mall. We had that.
Is a great device, is a really great personal device, but places where it seemed to lack certainly efficiencies was if we were to put it on a tripod or a davit arm, or use it in a situation like this where we're actually raising and lowering, because we don't have the efficiency of a pulley as the rope travels around the camp. The other side of the coin is that nowadays we're seeing a big transference from the traditional rack and tandem prusik system in terms of mainline and belay lines, because the devices now have the capability of doing that load transfer or direction change of direction, easy change of direction. Whereas with a rack, and some of this may sound foreign to you. Are you familiar if I use the term rack and double pin or tandem belay? Do you know what that means?
No.
Okay, so it's kind of old school, still used to some degree, but very old school. Oh, there you go.
There's a bar rack.
So there's a bar rack. So let me back up and just say that everything that we do in the rope world, in the vertical realm, is all based on gravity and friction. So gravity, inevitably, we step over that edge, gravity takes over. So we put friction in to systems using personal protective devices and kit in order to apply friction to overcome that gravity. That's all we're doing. So something like this, where the rope travels through here, is rope going up and over these cylinders, and the more we add in, the more friction, the more we take out, the less friction. So we can run rope through here, and just like we lowered down here through the MPDs in days not too long ago, and in still many departments and rescue organizations, they'll still use the rack because of its simplicity. The other thing too that's really nice about the rack is that it dissipates heat really well. So if you're doing long rappels, or you've got a big rescue package that you're trying to control with this, you're going to get a lot of heat buildup as the rope runs over here with friction. So these are great for dissipating heat. And if you've got really dirty ropes, icy or snowy ropes, you don't have really tight tolerances like you do as rope travels around here. So they're really good for dirty ropes. Because it's a progressive capture device, just like an ID, just like an MPD, just like a gree-gree, stop, that as I progress, as the system progresses, then it locks in place. So always good rope etiquette is to make sure that you've always got control of one hand on the rope and never let go of that side of the rope. Always maintain brake control of the rope and just to be able to haul. And from here, we can build that identical system, whether it's an inline system like this, or we build a detachable system. Same thing applies. Always maintain control over the brake side of the rope, and we can build our efficiencies as low or as high as we need them to be in terms of mechanical advantage. How much force is it rated for?
Does it slip?
It does slip, yeah. It has to slip somewhat. I'm not sure I understand. What do you mean? How much weight is it?
Well, the weight
rated
that you're pulling up type of thing, if we're pulling one person, but if you've got a second person that's there, like you'd never put more than.
It's rated for rescue. So
Yeah.
It's G rated. It's NFPA G rated, so minimum 22 kilonewtons, right? It'll and it is intended based on the BCC drop test. It's rated for. It's tested at a single person load of 100 kilograms, dropped a meter, so no damage to the rope, no damage to the device or deflection in the device.
is there slippage at that point?
There is some slippage, yeah, but we're finding more and more that we're not getting as much slippage as we used to with some of the earlier Petzl devices now that are a little more positive, but there still is slippage, so as not to get damage in the rope.
Exactly. Do you tie it off?
That's what I was just thinking.
Like they tie the MPD?
Yeah, you know, that's certainly old school thinking, and I would still do that probably more out of habit. It doesn't show that in the technical notice.
No. You don't put it around the cleats at all if you're going to tie it off?
Well, there'd be no point.
Even if you open the
They
handle,
just-
the rope's already tied. It's
So-
got to go,
Yeah.
right? So-
Okay.
Technically, according to Petzl, as long as it's in its locked position,
Right.
it is good.
Right.
To your point, and I think just even from using it the last time to this time, just body position, you're so used to, not to compare to the MPD, but you're so used to using it in line this way. I found even just turning this way to operate is a much more comfortable position to be in.
Yes.
The only
Yeah.
downside, I think, is if in tandem, now I have to be between
Yeah.
the two devices unless
Right,
there's a little bit of
right.
separation.
Yep.
But that made it a lot easier for me to use. Standing facing this way, I can look down rope versus trying to look down
Right.
rope. Just that quarter turn made the handle
Yep.
much easier. So something maybe to try for the going forward for these two.
Does anybody follow Richard Delaney of Rope Lab? Okay. So one of the things that, going back to what I had said earlier when we were talking about bar racks and tandem pulley systems for belays, that they're definitely very personnel intensive. So you've got to have a dedicated person on the rack. You've got to have a dedicated person on the belay line. And then it's good to have multiple bodies around if you're changing from hauls to lowers and lowers to hauls. One of the new things that's come out recently, and I'm sure many of you have heard of this, that let me just take a step back to the past, almost 90+% of the weight was taken up by the main line and the belay line was kept slack. So we would always have a little bit of waggle in there. And you'd manage your prussics and you would try to always have this diminishing loop in there and thumbs up if you're familiar with those kinds of systems. And what we're seeing now though is that in testing, that if there was a catastrophic failure in the main line, there was quite a drop for the load to be taken up into the belay line, and so we were ending up with a fair bit of shock loading. Biggest problem is we want to make sure we don't get shock loading to the human body, because that can be very bad. We also don't want to see it into our anchors or into our system or any rope breakage. So this philosophy started a good few years ago now, 5+, probably no more than 10, of having shared systems or parallel systems, mirrored systems, whatever you'd like to call it, where you're trying to maintain the load equally on both ropes, both anchors, both systems, both descenders. And then if there is a failure in one line, the other line doesn't have to work so hard, or there isn't a drop or shock load in order to take on the system or take on the rescue package. So one of the things Richard Delaney had talked about extensively was, especially if you're with a crew or fire departments or rescue organizations that are limited to manpower, that one person can control two IDs very nicely, because you can line them up and one hand can control both handles. The second person would come in just to tether the end of the rope. So you still have a safety margin there. But instead of Jason and I going, okay, don't stop, and we're trying to keep up with each other, one person can manage those quite nicely, because they're doing all the work and they have all the feel. It's not you and I trying to communicate as we sort of try to come in sync with the feel of the rope and the tension of the rope. So, long-winded way of saying the same thing holds true with the maestro. So Chris is concerned to the fact that now you might have somebody who's in between the two ropes and systems, and if you're on one paw, for example, you've got very little clearance, and that you get a bit of a pinch point in there. Alternatively, you can offset things so that you're not going to necessarily be right in place of two highly tensioned moving ropes, or you set them both up and you've got a mirrored system and one person manages both of those handles. And so they're nice and slim in the sense that I can pull both handles up and have two maestros side by each. Thank you very much, Vanna. Two maestros side by each, and one person controlling both of those handles, and then still, Dave would be on the ends of both ropes just tethering those lines in the event that Chris falls asleep or gets stung by a bee or hates me. And Dave doesn't think much more of me, but I'd hope that he would hold on to the ropes. I'll give you a sticker, Dave.